Howdy, all you delicious people. I'm here today to review The Mitchells versus the Machines. So, honestly, I would say that I really did thoroughly love and enjoy this anime movie because I think it has everything that is, one, kind of all over the place, but it has a lot of heart to it. Uh, it has a lot of good beats to it. It really pulls at your heartstrings a lot, and it really has a movie that you can really care and invest in this family. Even though they seem to be odd, abolish like characters or whichever, like man, you really get invested in this family, and with that, you eventually get invested in the bizarrish story that is to unfold within this film. We end up having it to where this family has like the perfect tools to be able to take down technology. It seems that the one thing that I thought was going to probably be showcased within this family is I naturally assumed that considering this was like the Mitchells versus the Machines, I was assessing that this family was going to be a people or peoples that didn't rely on technology whatsoever. Like, technology had nothing to do with this entire family. That's what I was going to assess or assume was going to happen. But instead, we end up having a father within this family that is very much wanting to have uh, their family just put the phones away for a minute and have some family time. And we really have a father that is really just wanting them to enjoy the simpler things, to go on a road trip because it's an old fashioned thing to do, and really just enjoy the little things. Just go on and adventure, go and ride horses, which would be a giant mistake, to just really go out and enjoy the scenery and take a breath and just kind of really very much uh, kind of uh, just enjoy the little things. That's the thing that I kind of got from this movie. Like, there's a lot of people that would otherwise say, like, well, hey, like, I'm finally gonna, like, set my phone down and just enjoy things and just be able to just uh, like reconnect with people and dot to dot 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 without it having to be a Skype call away or something along those lines. I think really that's what this movie really tells us is just like, well, hey, uh, like I know that we've even relied more on technology than we have in previous year or so, or in within the last year or so. I mean, and so here's to have us reconnect and realize, like, okay, well, like now that we can be away from this technology, let's reconnect. Let's soak up our wild roots and be able to finally just go, oh, okay, we can breathe again. Okay, we can save the world if that's what we need to do. So that's what this movie is, kind of a very refreshing, very fun film. It's really funny also. We end up having these moments where we're consistently like showcasing these like home videos, and that just really pulls at your heartstrings, because remembering a family that used to like do home videos and stuff like that. Even my family used to do like home videos and stuff like that. Like, I kind of think that this movie probably does much more speak to a certain generation of people, but then also gets to the younger crowd by doing these like goofy little uh, snapshot or Snapchat like filters or effects or whatever within this film to make it seem different than anything else that has been put out there, and so on and so forth. Uh, we end up having consistently like this trying to be very much like I would call it probably it's a movie that realizes like technology and realizes what is the trending thing to do. And so that's what this movie tries to pull off, but then it also tries to say that it's also against technology and the most trending thing and whatever, and tries to give you quite a bit of old school like things and things that I can enjoy. Like we had like the father who had just lived in this cabin that he had built himself, and he had to unfortunately give up that cabin to eventually go on to uh, have a daughter and a family, and so he had to uh, come into having uh, more room, more space, more whatever, and so on and so forth. And so, like a lot of this is just kind of really like this story of this whole thing is just so fascinating. And I apologize if any bit of this kind of feels like a spoiler, but like I'm kind of bringing up bits and pieces of this movie because some people have probably seen it anyways, because it's easy accessible on Netflix right now. So going on into this movie, like, uh, I would say that this movie was just a fun adventure, and if anything, I'd probably said like adventure is not exactly a word that I would say for a movie that wins me over. But like the adventure of this also has a story, also has really fun visuals, also has a story within here that I myself can invest in and can understand and can go, wow, like this movie speaks to me. And so, really, I just kind of fell in love with it. But more than likely, it'll probably be a thing that after me watching this, I will probably quickly and utterly forget about it, just because that's the way the wheels tend to churn when you end up having to watch hundreds upon hundreds of movies and things just slip your mind. But in all actuality, I thoroughly enjoyed this movie, and I would love it if anybody who hasn't seen it yet go out of their way to see it. It seems like it's fairly popular on Netflix right now. Yeah, I just thoroughly got a real enjoyment out of this movie, and I think it's about that time to go into. Yeah, we went well over the 5 minutes of the cryptic like sense of this whole thing. So let's try as much as humanly possible to break this whole thing down. I think the best part of this entire movie probably has to be the mall scene where we just see an onslaught of just things arriving to get in the way of the Mitchells. And I just thought that that was just a hilarious scene of onslaught of things just coming at the Mitchells and them having to overcome, which I just thought was hilarious. So let's go out of our way to talk about this film, and let's go on to spoiler time. Spoiler time. It's about that time again to spoil this movie. So, if anything, this movie really would say, like, oh no, it's really focused upon a family. I'm like, well, technically, it kind of focuses between really two characters. It kind of focuses between Rick, who is the father character, and Katie, who is the daughter character. So, because we have it to where Katie is going to eventually leave home to eventually go to her film school, where Katie thinks that these film school people are her people, and like she just can't wait to leave home uh, to go to a place that uh, like she thinks is going to be a lot more fun than her home ever was, because it seems that Katie is having to put up with quite a bit of things with her family that she probably wouldn't have had to have put up with when she's with her people, so to speak. But eventually, she, at the tail end of this movie, realizes exactly why she's had to put up with all those things uh, to eventually conquer and save the day. So we end up having it to where we end up having Katie going and being a girl that seems to be a consistent person that is, I guess, a YouTuber and does all these goofy, funny videos that is of her basically bizarrely going and uh, doing like little skits where she ends up doing like a skit called Dog Cop, where we end up having her dog being some dog cop, and we end up having her dog cop arresting these like sock puppet like characters that Katie ends up making the voice for or making the characters for, and so on and so forth. And it seems that Katie either does stuff with her dog, little funny little videos where Katie ends up forcibly having her dog consistently lick her father, and so every little bit of time, it's some prank that she's repetitiously going on to her dad, where we end up having the dog being thrusted into frame and licking her father, where Rick is just like, "No, stop! No!" Like, that is probably the funniest part about this movie, and immediately a thing that I could easily connect with what's going on here. Because the very beginning of the movie, we just have like a scene being taken out of frame that is to just kind of tell us, like, well, hey, uh, like the world is coming to an end, and uh, the world needs to be saved by this one family that is bizarrely on this road trip, and it has led them to try and save the world. But hey, wait a minute, but let's see who these people are before we get further on here. So we end up seeing that Katie's mother, Linda, is a woman that seems to bizarrely make cupcakes of the family's faces. She tries her best to design these cupcakes with people's faces on it, their own faces upon it, and I thought that that was kind of goofy. We end up having Aaron, the brother of Katie, who seems to be very interested in dinosaurs to the point to where he ends up calling random numbers on a phone book to see if anybody wants to talk about dinosaurs, and if they don't, he ends up hanging up on them. Uh, we end up having Aaron talking about dinosaurs so often that we end up having Kate needing to forcibly be the person that is in all knowing and all knowledge of dinosaurs as well, because that's what Aaron is into. And so we end up having Linda, Rick, and Aaron, or Linda, Katie, and Aaron, all on their phones. We end up having Linda kind of looking through her social medias and stuff like that. Evidently, it seems like there is a family that seems to be one up better than they are, which is, I guess, technically the Posies. And so it seems that we end up having these three characters all going on their social media, and really we have it to where Rick is just like, well, hey, like, how about we all just put our phones away and just enjoy this meal that we're having at the dinner together? And so we end up having it to where we end up having Katie going on and like showcasing to the family of one of her videos that she's really proud of. And we end up having this being some dog cop like skit, which I honestly think was really actually hilarious. And we end up having eventually where Rick is ending up looking at this whole skit and he's like, huh? He's like, he doesn't quite get it. Like, we end up having it to where Rick is a separate generation of a person that just doesn't quite get what is going on and what Katie is doing. And immediately we have Rick who is immediately asking Katie, it's like, well, like, is this really gonna make you money? What is this? Like, I don't quite understand. We end up having Rick being a person that uh that doesn't quite like I don't think has ever really had a smartphone or has ever been on a computer. We end up having this person being the very person that is a void of all technology and so on and so forth. And so we end up having eventually Rick towards the tail end of this movie being forced to use technology, and eventually we have him doing some funny things along the way where he almost accidentally orders like 12 sandals by accident and so on and so forth. So because there is just that gap there, but eventually we end up uh, finding out that Katie is just kind of upset with her father, and so we end up having her just going on to talk to her people from her film school and just going like, man, I just can't wait to go to this film school because here are all people that understand. And so we end up having Linda eventually going to Katie and just going like, well, hey, like before you go off to school, we need one really good family photo. Like every single time we've ever had a family photo, every single time either you, Katie, or Rick are fighting or arguing about something. And so, like, there's a whole montage of photos that they have together where they're every single time having some argument or some something, to where every single time there is some goofy photo going on. And so we end up having it to where Rick is just on a very reminiscent like stint where he is to look back at old home videos to really go through and like remember the simpler days or to remember when his Katie was like really like not the person of which she is now, and just kind of reminiscing about that and reminiscing about simpler times where eventually they did all kinds of fun things together and like had all these fun adventures in these home videos and so on and so forth. So we end up having it to where technically uh, like Rick and Katie are almost one and the same, whereas like uh, Rick's old fashioned thing is home videos, where Katie's thing is a YouTube video, and like there is just like a disconnect between this whole generational thing. So we end up having Rick deciding that since Katie is going off to college, that he is going to instead of having her go on to this school early, that they are just going to go to have a road trip this whole thing out, and go on an adventure while they are to get to this school. And so Katie's like, well, yeah, that's great and all, but like the longer we stretch this out, like realistically, the longer that uh, that Katie is not going to be with her friends, and she's going to miss out on meeting all these people that are going to be at her school, and she's going to miss out on uh, like the friendships that she's going to make for the rest of her life, which is technically, I guess, at this film school. And so we end up having it to where like Katie is consistently keeping touch with these people, and they are to show that they're doing like a slip and slide and they're having so much fun, and Katie's like, oh my god, I'm missing out. So we end up having this seemingly technology guy. I would call him like a Steve Jobs, or the Bill Gates guy that is bringing out the new technological thing. And so we have this guy called Eric Andre who is putting out this new high tech uh, PAL uh, software thing of sorts. And so we end up having Eric Andre, who seems to have this older software of this PAL on his phone, and it seems that Eric is mentioning how PAL, like, man, we've really been together for a long time. Like, we'll have this friendship forever. And we have Eric who is talking to this technological device and like treating it as it's his best friend. And so we have pals like, yeah, my sentiments exactly. Like we're gonna be friends forever. And so immediately we have Eric Andre who goes on to this press conference that he's having, and immediately he ends up taking this phone and tossing it off to the side and saying like, hey guys, we have just made a new technological jump of PAL 2.0 or something along those lines. And so we have this guy who is mentioning how much of advancement that they are making with this company, and how eventually we have these like PAL-ish like robots that are going to come into the fray and are going to be the next step in technology. Ba 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 ba. So we end up having some hacking like thing that decides to hack into this technology and just take it over. And who would you think that that could quite possibly be? Of course, it's the technology that ended up getting scorned by having just be tossed off to the side because Eric didn't want it anymore. So we end up having this family going on this road trip, going and being on this horse trail that end up having them being uh, done through a storm of sorts where they end up completely and utterly regretting this. So we end up having the Mitchells ending up going on to this road trip, and so that lands them onto this place where we end up finding out that seemingly the robots are taking over and wanting to take every little person and uh, kind of suck them into this one cube thing and put them in prison indefinitely, to just put them on hold, I guess, to eventually they might either starve or die of thirst or whatever. And so we end up having seemingly all these robots just saying like, "Hey man, like, uh, let's take you and let's put you in this cube and like you'll be happy forever. Like this will be the happiest thing of your life." And we have one silly guy that's like, "Well, I want to be happy," and we end up having we end up having Rick saying like, no, like tell them that that's not going to be the happiest thing that is ever going to be done, or is ever going to happen to you. Like tell them they're wrong. Tell them whatever. And so we end up having these robots taking this guy with some laser to like tractor beam him in, uh, basically meaning like controlling this guy to where eventually they put him into this cube and just send him off, where then he realizes what a mistake that was. So we end up having that the that the Mitchells end up bumping into this family called the Posies, and it seems that we end up having Aaron who is talking with Abby, and it seems that both Aaron and Abby are to really connect with dinosaurs. It seems like both of them love them. It seems that at some point, when Katie was leaving home, we end up having Aaron who mentions it's like, well, like who am I going to be able to talk to about dinosaurs? And like Katie mentions, like, well, maybe someday you're gonna meet a girl who ends up liking dinosaurs as much as you do, and maybe that's gonna work out well for you. So we end up having Aaron meeting Abby, and it seems like him and her end up like connecting with dinosaurs, but then eventually he just feels so weirded out by this whole conversation going well that he ends up saying like, "Oh, I hate you," like I never want to talk to you again. And so we end up having uh, Rick mentioning that he's like, you know what, I really think that I need to have a talk with Aaron about it. Like eventually, like, hey man, you're gonna eventually want a girlfriend, and so maybe I need to have a talk with that Aaron about it, So we end up having these posies that seem to be very like Charlie's Angels, like shot out into action whenever like something is going down. It seems because it seems to be like the perfect family where they should be the ones saving the world, but it ends up getting relegated to the Mitchells. So we end up having these robots going and trying to take people into these pods, and so the posies end up like bursting into action, and they're like attack pattern alpha, and like let's do this, and like we end up having like Haley just rolling over Jim and doing all these like weird bizarrish like attack formation moves, and so we end up having this family going out and trying to defeat these robots, and we just end up seeing them like easily go and fight off all these robots all upon themselves with their matrix moves and all these like cool action little things, and then we end up having the Mitchells just otherwise decide like, well, hey, like how about we just barricade ourselves into this one place and then just like and try to just live off the land, I guess, because we're not going to go out there, because immediately when we're going to go out there, we're going to get sucked into those cube things. And so we end up eventually having the Mitchells seemingly being the last to be in this environment. And so eventually we have it to where it seems that some portion of the family go out to uh, try and like scout things going on, because Katie's to realize that eventually she wants to get out of here. She wants to be able to get back to her life that she wants to get to, which is school. And so, what better way to just resolve this now but to just try to just either get caught or just try to save the world at this point? So, we end up having Katie trying to rally her family to just like, hey guys, like we need to go and save the world. Like definitely we need to get together. And so we end up having Rick going like, well, yeah, like we need to be just like the Posies, to where like everybody get together and like attack pattern alpha, and like my name will be like Papa Bear, and all this other rigmarole that they end up like putting together, where like bizarrely Rick has to all say that like they all have code names now and all this bizarre stuff. So we end up going along and have Aaron saying God, well, Katie, why did you like put this all together? And Katie's like, well, you know what, like I just said whatever I needed to say to uh reasonably like just get people to do whatever I wanted. And so Aaron's like, well, okay. Because we end up having it to where either like Rick is starting to have some argument against Katie or vice versa. And we end up having Linda, who is giving Rick cue cards to read off to say stuff to Katie. And when Katie is going to start to have an argument with Rick, we end up having Aaron busting out cue cards for Katie to read, and so like we end up having like this whole family trying to go out of their way to avoid these arguments, and so on and so forth. So we end up going along, and so we have Katie who has this whole entire plan that she wants to disguise herself as these robots and eventually go into uh, the evil Lair's headquarters and have some kill key to uh, put into somewhere to dissolve this whole thing. And so we end up having Katie have this plan, but it seems that they don't try to go with that right away. It seems like Rick is like, well, hey, like, uh, forget all of that plan. You know what? Like, all we need to do is just have the things that we've always had for the longest time. And we have Rick, like, showcasing us that, like, uh, that they all have some bizarre screwdriver that doesn't make sense for them to ever have. And that Rick thinks that he has a way better plan, and so on and so forth. And so we end up having them all eventually going into this mall, which we end up having this just onslaught of all these like smart appliances that end up trying to attack this family. And all of a sudden, they all get bombarded by these Furbies. And so we end up having this one gigantic Furby that ends up coming to the fray. And so we end up having it to where Rick tries to put this plan together that he remembers that he had made during hunting some trap to get this animal. And so he ends up taking this big, huge, like Christmas tree lighting rope thing and ends up putting a big, huge, uh, like hole for this Furby to walk in on. And so Rick pulls the string of this rope, and the Furby is to get caught in this rope and and fall into this trap, this rope trap. And so here's the thing: we end up having these two robots uh, mention how that they are trying to pretend to be humans, and that we have these two robots that end up being tied to this family and are saying like, well, hey, yeah, like we're humans, we're human beings, look at us eat breakfast. And so we end up having one of the robots shoving an orange into their faces, and it just crushes the orange and it just falls over. And so we end up bizarrely having these robots who have been very defective, because um, we end up having this family ending up like pulling some cords out of these robots to change them to be much more having a free will, and so they end up being onto the side of the humans, and so on and so forth. So we eventually have it to where we're at this giant mall where Rick is trying to trap this Furby and it's not working out. And so we end up having the entire family all jumping onto the back of Rick's back to try to pull this Furby upside down so he gets trapped in his trap. And so the two robots end up using their gun to pull the rest of the family down to where the Furby does get caught in this trap. And so it does work out. So we end up having it to where eventually we get this whole onslaught of appliances and all kind of interesting action maneuvers and whatever, because eventually Pal, the villain, is trying to seek out the last human remaining people, which is of course the Mitchells. And so we eventually go on into here and eventually have it to where there is a video that eventually gets showcased that the somebody gets to see that Katie, all she wanted to do is just manipulate the family to do what she wanted. And so we end up eventually having it to where Rick eventually sees this video. And so we end up having Rick going on and just be devastated by this, and how really Rick is starting to realize how, like, Katie and him are never gonna ever see eye to eye, and so on and so forth. And he eventually realizes that eventually, once he sees one of Katie's actual videos, what wrong he has ever really and truly done. So we go on to eventually have Rick eventually seeing the video where Katie is just manipulating people. And so we eventually see that it seems that Rick has consistently held on to this one little moose, little wooden thing, to where eventually that is his most favorite possession thing. And to where Katie is just like, well, why is that thing so special to him? To where eventually, at some points, we end up having eventually Rick giving Katie this special thing to him. And so we end up having Katie, who ends up kind of going through the camcorder and to just kind of like fix some things. And she ends up noticing that she's actually accidentally recording over some old videos. And so she ends up starting to play the old videos and noticing that this moose thing was tied to this cabin that Rick had made with his own hands, and that Rick did not want to leave this cabin because, like, this was the best part of his life, that he had to leave to move on to eventually he had to move on to a real home and a real place because of Katie. And so we end up finding out that Katie realizes that Rick had to give up everything for Katie, and that's maybe why that Katie and Rick butt heads so much. And so we end up kind of having that nice tender moment, and we end up finding out why Katie realizes that Rick had this thing for so long, and he was really attached to it because that was the only remaining thing they had left of that cabin. So we push on. So we end up eventually having it to where eventually we go on and do the thing that Katie wanted. We end up having it to where the entire family all ends up dressing up just like the robots and making their way into these headquarters, to where eventually Rick ends up seeing uh, the video, and that's what gets him upset. And then eventually Katie sees the video, and then so we end up eventually seeing that because these people end up trying to sneak into this headquarters, and eventually the mother and father ends up getting caught because they end up kind of falling out of this vehicle because Rick lost control of it, and they ended up getting caught. We eventually have it to where uh, it seems that Rick ends up getting caught in this cube-ish like thing that everyone else gets caught in. But here's also this really funny moment. We end up having one home video where we end up having both. It seems that Rick and Katie both connect with this one song that they end up like singing it all the time, and so we end up eventually, while Katie and Rick eventually get together to attack all the robots, they end up singing this song together, and eventually, like, the entire family just starts to chime in and attack all these robots while singing along with this song, which I thought was really hilarious, which I thought was really fun, and, like, is a really good moment. So, but anyways, so we end up having Rick, who is to go onto this cube, and he ends up coincidentally being cubed next to the creator of this whole PAL thing. And so we end up finding out that Rick is to see that this creator guy bizarrely had found and stumbled upon Katie's videos, and that's the only thing that has been kind of getting him through this whole troubled time of him not being able to uh, like realizing that this Eric guy has basically caused the end of the world. Like, this is almost like Terminator in a lot of ways. This is like Cyberdyne and whatever. And luckily, I just recently seen a bulk of those Terminator movies to just say, like, yeah, like, this movie is basically Terminator, but like in a much more kid friendly, family movie like way. Like, it's pretty much Terminator with the exclusion of having an entire family trying to beat these robots. So, like, it's almost, yeah, it's very similar to almost like Terminator 2, but in a much more kid friendly, whichever like way. It really is that. So going into this, uh, we end up having we end up having Katie making her way into here because we end up finding out that Rick is to find out that his cube could be uh, opened by him having this unique screwdriver, of course, the one that Rick has. And so Rick ends up opening his pod open, and so he ends up finding his wife and opening her pod to where they are to try to figure out how to take Pal down. So we end up having Kate with the plan of going in there and trying uh, to upload the kill code of of PAL to take her down. And so we end up finding out that it seems that a visual of a dog or a pet of sorts can hurt these robots. And so we end up having it to where Kate ends up driving into this environment with dog cop on top of her car, and driving through here, every single one of the robots try and uh, go after Kate, but then all they see is the dog, and so they malfunction. And so we end up figuring out that Rick and Linda realize that they need to just spam uh, whole entire headquarters with Katie's videos of their dog. And so also, it was also kind of funny that they, like, their plan, like the family's plan of after they won, that they beat this whole thing, that they were all going to get together and have a dinner together, and have the dog wearing a like tuxedo like a little gentleman. And it's like, wait a minute, what? It's like, I guess they really love putting like clothes on this dog and whatever. But it is also kind of funny that like this dog was like really cross-eyed, and so we end up having at some point that Linda is trying to get the dog to uncross his eyes, and so on and so forth. To where eventually, towards the very tail end of this movie, the dog ends up, because uh, he ends up uncrossing his eyes to eventually try to thwart this PAL, this basically cell phone. So we end up having Kate driving in to try and do a kill code this uh, onto this uh, onto this PAL like thing, but we end up sadly having Kate not being able to get to it, so she ends up trying to have her father get to it, to where he ends up now having to uh, like figure out how to get to these YouTube videos to post them out. And so he's like, where do I go? And so we end up having Katie like talking him what to do, of like, you have to go to youtube.com, and you have to like, you have to do this video and this and that. And Rick is just like, oh my god, I accidentally went on Amazon and I bought 12 sandals. Oh my god. Like, I didn't want to do that. And eventually we accidentally have Rick, who ends up stumbling accidentally on the settings and ends up changing the language of from English to, I guess, like Spanish. And so he has to figure out how to like be able to um, search for things with not even the right language on there. So we eventually have it to where after this whole thing is over, Rick eventually going into technology a little bit more, and being able to go through computers and stuff like that, and like eventually like trying to eventually figure out how to do things a little bit more. But then he also does things the old-fashioned way, which is to uh, like give Kitty a note through a letter that just is like, "Hey, be my friend on the internet," which I think was just kind of nice and heartwarming. So, anyways, we end up having uh, eventually uh, that Rick puts up all the videos on the headquarters, which ends up malfunctioning all the robots. But then eventually we end up having this entire family having to take all of the robots out. We end up having Rick, who is like flying on top of one of the robots, and Katie is flying on top of one of the robots, and they are singing this song together, and they are taking all these robots out, and it's we end up having them taking all the robots out because it seems like there were some robots that uh, weren't really affected by a dog being shoved in their face, and so we end up having the family all taking them out. We have the mother, who is now kind of showing that she is like crouching tiger, hidden dragon, and she's like slicing and dicing all of these robots uh, to get them out of the way. And so we eventually have it to where Katie is to eventually take down this PAL. And so we end up simply having it to where Katie eventually takes PAL and ends up like chucking it. To where we are to assume that PAL is going to end up in some pool or something somewhere, but we end up having it to where this pal ends up just into a glass of water because uh, we end up having their dog that ends up uncrossing his eyes, seeing the phone there, and bips it to where it ends up in a glass of water, to where uh, the phone just starts to malfunction and all of a sudden starts to uh, do a video of a gorilla going da, and then the pals going da, and like da 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 da, just to kind of make like a goofy looking ending for this pal and whatever and what have you. Like, a lot about this movie is really fun, and so with that said, we end up having everything going back to normal. Everybody is released from these pods, and so we end up having it to where everything's back to normal, and uh, everyone ends up getting locked from this pods once the the device and PAL and everything is just over, and so we end up having it to where oh, there was one moment that so we end up having, like I said, Eric, the whole creator of this, Eric Andre, the creator of this whole PAL thing. We end up having him watching a video of Katie's, and so then Rick ends up watching a video of Katie's, and then he ends up realizing like who he is through Katie's eyes, and so eventually he realizes uh, how he is not a person that he wants to be for Katie, and so him eventually rescuing both himself and Linda, and him trying to regroup with his family, like as a way of him like starting to realize how much that he has to really make up for, and how much of a different person that he now has to be. So everybody won, the world is saved, and so we end up having it to where Katie is to make it to this college and realize that she is basically the girl that saved the world kind of thing. And so we end up having Katie eventually having this like Skype call with her family. And so we end up having them all like having like this little dialogue together and so on and so forth. But the funniest thing that I thought was kind of interesting is when you were to assume that after uh, Katie had we almost thought that Katie had some point almost was going to die at the tail end of this movie, and we end up having Rick coming after her, and we end up having Katie going like, yeah, there's one last thing that I need to tell you, Dad, and Rick is like, what? And so we end up having Katie like bringing the dog into Rick's face, and the dog licks him one last time. It's like, Katie, no. I thought that that moment was so funny. I was like, God, they kept like I knew that that was like coming eventually somewhere down the road somewhere, because I was like, well, like they really prepped that like that was going to happen, and like it was really just kind of funny how like Katie was still figuring out a way to just prank her father and get him one last time. Um, so they end up having this Skype call where they end up having this like this talk out and whatever, and so anyways, so yeah, like really that's just kind of how the movie just kind of just ends, in my eyes that's how the movie just ends. So with that said, I am going to get out of here so I can put this footage out there. Really fun movie at the end of the day, considering how usually my dialogue is, or my review way of doing things is. So I'm gonna get out of here. Bye, everybody. Bye, everybody. Oh, hello. Considering I had this time, plus I have to do I have to do this kind of fusing of footage anyways. Uh, like we had it to where Katie ends up going to Pal, like the one thing that I forgot about, and we end up having it to where Pal is to ask Katie what is the one reason for Pal to save the human race uh, and keep them alive. And Katie's reasoning is that there are some times when you have to do things you don't want to do um, because uh, because one person will want you to do this, one person will want you to do that, one person will tell you to do this and that. And so you don't do that because you feel like you are like obligated to do it. It just feels like it's something that you should do. And so because we end up having it to where Pal asked Eric Andre that same uh, reason of reasoning of like asking Andre, it's like, well, why should I keep the human race alive? And Eric Andre says like, well, the power of love, and Pal is just like, no, like take him away. To where now Pal asks Katie, it's like, well, why should I keep the human race alive? To where she mentions that it's just the thing that you should do is just keep the human race alive. So, and that's eventually where Katie ends up taking Pal and ends up tossing her into eventually the drink to where she is to get eventually taken down. So yeah, really interesting movie, but at the end of the day, I think I got everything that I wanted to talk about and get out and whichever. So I think I'm out of here. Goodbye, everybody. Goodbye, everybody.